It's great to be here in beautiful Madeira. It's my first time, and I've got to say what a wonderful island you have. So look, thank you so much for joining me today as I discuss navigating the UK's crypto regulation and looking at the things that you need to know and what's on the horizon. Before I get into that, actually, I've got to say, this is one of the first times I've been at a conference where being a regulatory lawyer is not a bad thing. It seems like there's quite a lot of enthusiasm for it. So hopefully we're all moving in the right direction, which is always pleasant. So look, I'll give you a little bit of detail about myself. I think it's always useful from a credibility perspective. I'm not just up here rambling on about regulation for no reason. I'm a London-based lawyer. I specialize in advisory regulatory matters, working primarily with clients in emerging and disruptive tech. I spent a number of years working for an international offshore law firm where I advised quite a lot of international businesses on their offshore structures, looking at regulatory issues and how they interplayed with each other. And I also had the pleasure of being a financial crime prosecutor for just under 3 years, where I worked on a broad range of international investigations and prosecutions, working with law enforcement authorities in the US, in the UK, in Asia. And towards the end of that period, I ended up doing quite a lot of investigations around money laundering using crypto as a rail on or out of the financial system. So that's probably where I really first got into it. These days, I also actually spend quite a bit of time with founders and startups as a coach and mentor on a number of incubators. So I do a lot of work with a venture builder called Block Dojo, which specializes in AI and blockchain projects. So I've been really fortunate to get to see this space from the ideation phase with businesses right through to the worst scenario where you might be under the regulatory scrutiny or you might be under investigation from an agency. So hopefully I cover a lot of the bases. These days, I focus really on the advisory, business, and regulatory consultancy side of things. So really working with clients to help them implement compliant procedures and policies and have robust governance frameworks. And that's probably how Cybersandbox was actually born, because what we tended to find is that the very nature of blockchain and the businesses that are established using blockchain technology, they end up being quite global. And so a large part of what I do is trying to find that path of least resistance, navigating lots of different competing regulatory regimes. So a lot of my work does necessarily involve looking at international regulation. So regulation is my thing from all different angles. So in terms of what I'm going to look at today, I'm going to look at regulation in the UK. Now, of course, we just don't have time for me to cover every blade of grass. So what and I don't think you'd want me to, because you don't want me to descend into a law lecture, which I'm sure nobody wants in the morning. So what I decided to do is kind of think about it from the perspective of a founder or a startup that is thinking about either establishing a crypto business in the UK or wants to do business into the UK. And in that sense, I think the three key regimes that are important to know about are the regulatory perimeter, oh actually no, that's not that slide yet, the regulatory perimeter under the Financial Services and Markets Act, crypto registration, which is part of the AML framework in the UK, and the financial promotions regime, which is just a fancy word for saying the rules around how you can market crypto assets. But the other big health warning I've got to give is that regulation isn't the be-all and end-all of the question. You really do need to think about the local laws in each jurisdiction that you touch, whether it's thinking about particular data protection rules or thinking about particular rules around consumer protection, or indeed contract laws. Contract law is always an issue. People don't appreciate that different countries have different rules around what types of agreements you can lawfully enter into. So regulation is but one part of the puzzle, but I think it's the most interesting part. But before we dive into those three areas that I wanted to talk about, I think it's important just to take a step back and say, well, what are the objectives of regulation in the UK? Now, the primary regulator for today's purposes is the Financial Conduct Authority. A lot of it's in the title. Conduct is quite an important part for them. And what are their three core objectives? For me, it's consumer protection, ensuring that there are adequate procedures to prevent financial crime, and of course addressing systemic risk. And a lot of the approach by the FCA is molded by those horrendous stories we've seen in the crypto space over the last 5-6 years around phishing scams, rug pulls, FTX, and this very much molds the way that the FCA has approached crypto regulation. It has come at things in that way. And in particular, they're really concerned about ensuring that UK consumers are safe. And in that sense, they will flex their territorial muscles wherever they can. So yes, it does really focus on those people doing business in the UK, but where you might have operations in the UK and you're reaching into the UK, you equally have to be very cautious of it. So getting into the substance. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the regulatory perimeter under FISMA. Now, what is the regulatory perimeter? It's an invisible line, I like to call it, that is a boundary, and everything within it is regulated and requires authorization, subject to exemptions and exclusions, and everything outside of it is, again, probably doesn't need authorization, but be mindful that it might engage other things. And essentially, the question of when you need to be authorized involves kind of a combination of 4 ingredients, and it goes like this. It's where you have specified activities in relation to specified investments being undertaken by way of business in or from the UK. What I might do for this today is actually just pin the specified investments for now, because that's going to be quite an interesting point to talk about, and just skip through the other 3 elements. So, specified activities. In very simple terms, these are actions that are deemed to be financial services. And they're all the traditional stuff. We see a lot of them reflected in a lot of what we've seen in MiCA as well. It's things like custody services, investment advice. A big one that tends to catch people is arranging deals in investments. So any kind of activity, you have to think to yourself, is it a specified activity? The by way of business test is a very important one in the UK's regime, because the regulator's really concerned with people that are doing their businesses or by way of business as a commercial enterprise. Sort of one-off occurrences of things don't necessarily kind of grab their attention, but where you're doing it as a business, where it's regular, where it's commercial, where you're holding yourself out as a commercial enterprise and you're engaging the trust of consumers, that's when they're really particularly interested. And then the territorial scope is it's actually something that people can often get can trip up in respect of, because yes, they're primarily focused on business in or from the UK, and people think, fine, I don't have a UK company, I'm not in the UK, that's fine. But actually, if you're an overseas company but you've got a UK bank account, you're dealing with UK customers, you might have UK people, not even a branch, just people, key personnel dealing in the business for you in the UK. The FCA will stretch their long arm to get you, so to speak. Not that they're the bad man trying to get you, but that's what they'll do. So rolling it back, why do we care about this in the context of anything? Well, going hand in hand with the regulatory perimeter in the UK is something called the general prohibition. And under FISMA, there is a general prohibition against undertaking authorized activity without authorization. It is a criminal offense. It's important to understand that there are different protections inside and outside of the perimeter that you need to be aware of, and if you're not doing that, that's also going to expose you to particular liabilities. It's super important to appreciate that the regulatory perimeter isn't static. It's constantly moving and evolving, maybe not through primary legislation, but through guidance and the way that the regulator interacts with the industry. They will make new rules to try and ensure that new products are caught within the realm. And so one of the big things that we were seeing, especially at the early stages of sort of the crypto journey into the UK, were businesses saying, well, what's this? This law is so antiquated. It's got nothing to do with this new tech. But that is a misguided mistake to make, because there is an exercise called transposition where they will look at their existing laws and try to apply it to new tech. And the idea is that financial regulation, from the FCA's perspective, is tech agnostic. They don't care what technology is being used to deliver the financial services. It's just a question of whether financial services are being delivered. And so that brings me to the big point around specified investments, because this is where the FCA has flexed its muscles, so to speak, because they've made it very clear to industry in the UK that they will take a substance over form approach. So initially, people thought, I'm in super safe territory. Specified investments are very clear in the legislation. It's shares and debentures and traditional, financial instruments like that. But what the FCA did is they issued guidance around basically a new taxonomy about how they will look at crypto assets, tokens, we'll say. And they come up with 2 categories, which are regulated tokens and unregulated tokens. And actually, unregulated tokens are quite a broad category. So it is fair to say that crypto assets, currently at least, are largely unregulated, because they will include things like utility tokens and exchange tokens, your traditional cryptocurrencies. But actually, security tokens are something that fall within the category of regulated tokens. And what security tokens are things that look and behave behave and act like a financial instrument. And the FCA's view is that if in substance, when I strip away nomenclature, when I strip away the title of the thing, if it's actually behaving, if this token is the same as a share in a company in reality, I'm going to treat it that way. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, we're going to treat it like a duck. And we're not going to let you get away with that. And then in terms of they're always constantly looking at, they've made it very clear, we'll constantly look at what is a regulated token. So the things on the horizon at the moment are thinking about whether stable coins might be brought in, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. For now, e-money tokens at least are considered regulated tokens. So what does that mean in terms of the perimeter piece? It means that you need to appreciate that there's substance over form. You need to, if you've got a business engaged in crypto assets, you've got to think, well, what are the nature of these crypto assets? Because if you have a crypto asset which is effectively performing like some form of security, and you're doing activities which are akin to traditional financial services activities, so arranging deals in respect to them, and you're doing that by way of business and it's in the UK, all the ingredients are met and you're probably going to need to be authorized. Failure to do so may result in criminal liability. And the one that tends to scare a lot of clients when I talk about it is actually a lot of the contracts that you enter into will become unenforceable. Nothing quite gets the attention, I think, of people when you realize that all the business you've done can be unwound if you've done it outside of the regulatory authority when you should have had regulatory authority. So the next big aspect of the framework in the UK is the crypto asset registration scheme. And this was really born to capture VASPs. And the idea is that there was a massive concern that crypto can be used as for money laundering, as a way to move illicit funds in and out of the financial system. So where you have a business that's an exchange, so I think most people will appreciate, that's a business where it's fiat, you're allowing for the exchange of fiat to crypto, crypto to crypto, crypto to fiat, and also where you're undertaking custodian wallet services, so traditional custody of digital assets, looking after private keys. You need to register with the FCA because they are the supervisory authority for AML for crypto asset business. An easier task than said because so few applications are actually getting over the ground. Because in order to register, in order to be registered, your successful application rather, you need to show that you've undertaken a business-wide risk assessment looking at your geographical risks, the different types of business that you undertake and what money laundering risks there might be there. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have clear client verification processes so that you can do KYC, CDD, that you've got ongoing monitoring, that you understand where you might have higher risk clients, that you have things like enhanced due diligence. And then finally, you need to be able to demonstrate good operational controls. So things like having a money laundering officer, having policies and procedures in place. And a lot of people have struggled with this. And this is something that the FCA is aware of. And they are working with industry to try to work out how can we get better adoption. But for the now, they don't want to roll back on those requirements because going back to those bad actors and those negative news stories that I spoke of earlier, the key concern is that there is potential for criminality and they just don't want that in the UK. And so the final kind of big aspect of the UK's regulatory regime that I think you need to know about is the financial promotions regime. So what is the financial promotions regime? It's essentially a fancy way of saying marketing. How do you market? What are the rules around marketing crypto assets into UK customers? And essentially, it's probably easier for me to kind of work through what's the definition of a financial promotion. So a financial promotion is any invitation or inducement to engage in investment activity communicated in the course of business. So basically any communication which persuades or influences somebody to, in simple terms, purchase a token from your business, whatever that may be. There is a general restriction, similar to the general prohibition. The UK loves the general restriction, and you have the same thing here. So the general restriction is that you can't do financial promotions unless you are an authorized person. So somebody already engaging with the FCA as an authorized person. You've applied for authorization and you've got it. You can also undertake financial promotions if you are if it's approved by a regulated person. And then thirdly is if an exemption applies. And the main one in crypto is whether you are crypto registered. So if you've successfully been able to get through the crypto registration regime, which so few are, then you can do financial promotions. And anybody that's doing that's doing it outside of those gateways is breaking the law. So the first pain point then comes as to, well, actually, why do we care about it in terms of crypto? Well, again, up until last year, or the thought process for a lot of people was, well, financial promotion is really only bothered about the promotion of investments, of financial investments, of, I'm trying to sell shares, or I'm trying to sell derivatives, or I'm trying, what's it got to do with me and crypto? But as of October last year, the FCA introduced something called a qualifying crypto asset. And that's essentially any cryptographic representation of value or contractual rights that is transferable and fungible is a qualifying crypto asset. So if you think back to what I talked about around regulated tokens and unregulated tokens, it's probably quite narrow because a security token and an e-money token, they're very specific things. But when we're talking about qualifying crypto assets, it's a huge blanket. And it captures pretty much all utility tokens. It captures most common, all cryptocurrencies really. In fact, the only thing outside of it are non-fungible tokens. And there's some question marks around how far that stretches too. I think we talked about it in one of the presentations yesterday around NFTs and are they always outside of the scope? And effectively, what that means is that you now, when you're marketing qualifying crypto assets, you now need to go through the pain of ensuring that you are hitting the standards that are required for a financial promotion from the FCA. So it needs to be fair, not misleading. And all of this very clear language with disclaimers and warnings to ensure that consumers are protected and understand what they're buying. The other real pain point that a lot of my clients are seeing is that not only do you have this concept of qualifying crypto assets now, which brings tokens into the realm of financial promotions, but they also consider that qualifying crypto assets are something called restricted mass market instruments. And so what this means is the UK regulator and legislators have said, well, actually, no, we're going to treat these as a particular type of thing where restrictions are needed. So if you're intending to promote these things to people, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've assessed the suitability of these people to purchase it. And so that's a massive pain point because it causes a real obstacle in the kind of the customer journey and flow of your business, because you now need to require questionnaires to be filled in where you can then evidence that this isn't going to leave someone bankrupt if they buy these tokens, that you've got massive disclaimer language all over the place, whether it's on your website or at other points of the customer journey. And the other massive pain point is that if you have a platform where somebody can go on and buy a token, that's deemed a direct offer financial promotion. And one of the massive problems with that is that the FCA require a 24-hour cooling off period. So a lot of clients are complaining that, how am I meant to do business? If someone comes on my site, they want to buy the token, but they have to wait 24 hours before they can do it, in which time they're probably going to go and do something else. So this is where we're at, unfortunately. I say unfortunately, I mean, this is where we're at this stage. We don't know how things might develop, but we hope that in engaging with the FCA, there might be better ways to kind of implement these things. But these are kind of the three key aspects of the UK regulatory regime. So then I come to my favorite phrase that I like to say to clients, which is, nothing kills companies quicker than non-compliance. And I say that in the context of, we've looked at some of the UK regulatory approaches, but actually one of the messages that comes out of it all is that the question of what is and what is not compliant is quite vague and nebulous. So actually what you end up having to do is to say, well, I need to just prepare for the worst. So my sort of healthy checklist of points that I try to run through with clients is, set yourself up as if you were going to be regulated to the best of your ability, because you never know when the regulator might come a knocking. But if they do, and you can say, well, I do CDD, I do KYC, I do sanction screening of my customers, I've got policies and procedures in place. We have a good cookie policy. We're aware of the GDPR issues. Do your analysis of the token. Go and take advice if necessary. Be comfortable and secure in the view that my token isn't a security token. It's not an e-money token. I don't need to be authorized. Ticking all of these things puts you in a much better position. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz to my final bit, which was the horizon issues. And I'll just pick two that I think are particularly interesting. So stablecoin regulation, I think, is going to be a big thing in the UK. So currently, stablecoins arguably sit outside of the regulatory perimeter. Some people say, well, they're clearly e-money tokens, but when you go to the definition of what is electronic money, there are often cases where stablecoins just don't fit it because you didn't need to pay fiat to receive the token. You might have got a stablecoin in exchange for another crypto asset, which weirdly puts it outside of the regime. Now, before the change in government, there was a lot of noise, very clear noise actually, and I think quite clear plans that they were going to bring stablecoins into the fold of the electronic money regulations, so that a whole regulatory system has to apply to them. That hasn't yet happened, but the view amongst a lot of us in the UK is that it is going to come. It's been delayed because of the change in government. And the other thing I think is important from a horizon perspective is to kind of track the talk about legislative reform. Now, again, at the time of the previous government, there had been loads of consultation processes and treasury papers, and they kind of mapped out what they were going to do in terms of the law around crypto assets. And the idea was this: they were going to bring crypto assets into the fold as specified investments, so to speak, so that they would be clearly a specified investment. You wouldn't need to do that weird taxonomy piece that I talked about earlier. The idea was that that was also going to go hand in hand with a reform process. So if the extension of the law to crypto assets meant that you were going to stifle innovation, or there was just an awkward fit, they would look at amending laws so that that could fit better. There was going to be a rollout about ensuring that there needs to be a licensing and authorization process for the issuance of tokens, very similar to what we're seeing in MiCA. Hasn't happened yet, but that was the view. And I think the key point that people, sort of working through all those changes thought, well, that's not so bad, was the fact that they were saying we're going to regulate the activity and not the asset. So because I think what happened is, there was a concern, people were saying, well, you can't just assume crypto is bad. And I think they took that on board through the consultation processes. They said, no, we're not going to say crypto is bad, but we're going to look at crypto as part of the ecosystem, and we're going to look at the activities around it. And I think it's good and bad because it means that, they're open-minded to crypto assets becoming part of the financial regulatory ecosystem, so to speak. But it will necessarily engender more intervention and scrutiny from a regulator. So my closing remarks are this. I think from a UK perspective, there is a lot of scope to do crypto asset business. I think you need to front load those regulatory issues. You need to really shore up yourself from a governance perspective. And harking back to the words of somebody that spoke earlier today, one of my fellow speakers, I think it was Martinio. Regulation is opportunity. And I think the UK is going to be, they're ensuring that there are going to be opportunities for those people that want to do crypto business. So with that said, I'd like to invite any questions.